The boy threw himself under the horse's hooves, not beside the road, not near it. Under it, both arms locked around the stranger's boot body, flat in the mud, willing to be trampled rather than ignored one more time. The horse reared. The rider yanked the reins hard, barely kept the animal from crushing the child beneath it. "Sir?" The boy's voice didn't shake, didn't beg, just cut straight through the noise of the street like a blade. "My baby sister stopped crying an hour ago. She ain't made a sound since. Please." If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and hit the bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The boy hit the mud before Cole Hargrove's horse stopped moving. 8 years old, maybe? 9 knees split open through torn trouser legs, both hands locked around Cole's left boot, like God himself had welded them there. The horse startled sideways. Cole pulled the reins, steadied, the animal looked down. The boy was not crying. That was the worst part. Children that age who had stopped crying had already learned something no child should ever have to learn, that crying was a luxury, and luxury was something that belonged to people whose lives still had room for it. "Sir?" The boy's voice was flat and steady, in a way that made Cole's chest hurt. "I need 1 minute of your time." Cole looked up and down the main street of Caldwell Creek, Wyoming. Late afternoon, October 1886. The kind of cold that came early and stayed mean. People on the boardwalks going about their business, and not one of them looking at the boy in the mud. Not one pair of eyes. Like the child was invisible. Like they'd all decided collectively, and without discussion, that whatever was happening to this boy was not their problem. Cole had seen that kind of deliberate blindness before. He looked back down. "You're bleeding." "I know." The boy didn't look at his knees. "Sir, my mama's inside Drummond's store. They're taking everything. The deed to our land, our horses, all of it. Mr. Drummond's men are in there right now, and my mama—" He stopped. Something moved through his face, some emotion he'd been trained out of showing. "She told me to stay outside. She told me not to come in no matter what I heard." He paused. "I heard things, sir." Cole's jaw tightened. "And my baby sister's in there," the boy said. "She's 4 months old, and she ain't eaten since yesterday morning, and she won't stop." He stopped again, pressed his mouth into a line. "She was crying real loud an hour ago. Now she ain't making sound at all." Cole swung down from his horse in one motion. He tied the reins to the nearest post, crouched down in front of the boy eye level. Up close, the child was all angles and hollows. Cheekbones too prominent. Eyes too old. Dark hair falling across his forehead in wet streaks. "What's your name, son?" "Jesse. Jesse Calloway." "How long have they been in there, Jesse?" 2 hours, sir. Maybe more." "And you've been out here in this cold the whole time?" Jesse nodded once. Like the cold was irrelevant. Like cold was something that happened to people with the luxury of noticing it. Cole stood. "My name's Cole Hargrove. I'm going inside." Jesse released his boot. He stood up, wiped his bleeding knees on his trousers, without wincing, and looked up at Cole with those ancient, careful eyes. "Mr. Hargrove, whatever they tell you about my mama, it ain't true. She ain't behind on anything. My papa paid that land clean before he died. She's got the papers to prove it." "Then why are Drummond's men in there?" Jesse's face went very still. "Because the papers disappeared," he said quietly. 3 weeks after Papa died. Cole looked at this child standing in the mud, bleeding hungry, holding a world on shoulders that hadn't finished growing yet. And something that had been dormant in him for a long time shifted. Not woke up, just moved, like something heavy sliding a 1/4 inch to the left. He pushed open the door to Drummond Mercantile and Supply. The woman was standing at the far end of the counter, with her back straight, and her chin up, and her hands. Cole noticed the hands. First always noticed hands. Her hands were clasped in front of her so tight her knuckles had gone white. Not from fear, from the effort of not throwing them. She was maybe 30. Red-brown hair pulled back severe. A dress that had been good once patched now at the sleeves and the hem. The kind of patching done by someone who knew how to mend things, but didn't have time to make them look like they'd never been broken. She was thin the way working women got thin, not from vanity, but from skipping the meal so the children could eat. She held a baby against her chest with one arm. Small infant 4 months at the outside, wrapped in a blanket that had seen better days. The baby's face was pressed against the woman's shoulder, slack, not moving. Too still. Cole's throat closed. He recognized that stillness. He'd seen it before in a different room in a different life 11 years ago in a farmhouse outside of Laramie, and it had taken everything he was and shattered it like glass on stone floor. He breathed through it. He breathed through it the way he'd been breathing through it for 11 years, one breath at a time. 3 men stood on the other side of the counter. 2 were hired muscle, the kind of men who got paid to stand large and say little. The third was doing the talking 50s, silver hair, dressed too well for a man in a supply store, the particular look of someone who'd spent a long time using money as a substitute for character. Mrs. Calloway. The man's voice was patient, the way a blade is patient, just waiting for the right angle. I've explained this twice now. The promissory note your husband signed before his death puts this property in arrears by 14 months. The debt is legitimate. The amount is due. The debt is fabricated. The woman's voice didn't shake. Cole noted that. In his experience, a woman who didn't shake when everything was falling apart was either past feeling or past fearing, and neither one was good. My husband signed no such note. I've looked through every document Thomas left. There is no record of that loan. Records get lost, ma'am. Records get destroyed, she said. There's a difference. The man smiled. I'm prepared to be generous. Sign over the deed tonight, which you'll do eventually. Regardless, the law is quite clear on this, and I'll give you 30 days to vacate rather than the 10 I'm entitled to. Enough time to find somewhere to go. My children have nowhere to go. That's a personal matter, not a legal one. Cole stepped forward. He didn't reach for anything, didn't raise his voice, just walked to the counter and set both hands on the wood surface and looked at the well-dressed man the way men who've worn a badge learn to look at people measuring steady without blinking. I don't believe we've met, Cole said. The man's eyes moved to Cole, took in the trail coat, the Colt on his hip, the stillness that certain kinds of men carry in their bodies the way others carry illness quietly, thoroughly, all the way through. Franklin Drummond. I own this establishment. Cole Hargrove. Passing through. Cole glanced at the woman, at the baby, then back to Drummond. What's the amount of the debt? Drummond's expression shifted slightly. Excuse me. The promissory note. What's the amount? $240. And the property's worth? Drummond paused. That's not... What's the property worth, Mr. Drummond? A beat. Current land values in this county perhaps $800. So you're collecting a $240 debt by seizing an $800 property. Cole's voice didn't change. That's generous of you. It's the law. The law's a tool. What matters is who's holding it. Cole looked at the woman. Ma'am, have you seen this promissory note? She met his eyes. Hers were brown, dark, exhausted, but sharp. The eyes of someone who had been paying very close attention to everything for a very long time because no one else was. He showed me a paper, she said. My husband's signature at the bottom. But Thomas's signature had a particular way of making the capital C in Calloway. He always said a man's name deserved to be written right. She paused. The signature on that paper doesn't make the C that way. Cole looked at Drummond. You'll want to have that note examined by an independent party before you proceed any further. Drummond's face went very still. And who are you to suggest what I'll want, Mr. Hargrove? Former Deputy Marshal, Colorado Territory. Cole said it flat like a fact about weather. I know what a forged signature looks like in court, and I know what happens to the man who presents one. The 2 hired men had gone still in the specific way. Men go still when they're deciding whether the situation has changed enough to require a new response. Cole noted which one's hand was closer to his holster, noted the distance between himself and the door. Drummond smiled, but it was thinner now. Your jurisdiction ended when you left Colorado. My eyes work just fine in Wyoming. The door behind Cole opened. He didn't turn around. He heard Jesse's boots on the floorboards, felt the boy come to stand just to his left, slightly behind the way a child positions itself when it's decided to stop waiting outside. "Jesse." The woman's voice cracked just slightly, just the one syllable. "I told you to stay. Is Clara all right?" The boy was looking at the baby, his voice stripped down to nothing but the question. The woman's arm tightened around the infant. "She's all right. She ain't moved since I came in. She's sleeping. Mama." Jesse looked at his mother, and the look that passed between them was the kind that existed only between people who had survived something together. "Let me see her." The woman hesitated, then shifted the baby. Jesse stepped forward, touched the infant's cheek with 2 fingers, watched for a moment. Something in his face changed. He looked back at his mother and didn't say anything, and the fact that he didn't say anything told Cole everything. Cole looked at Drummond. "This conversation is over for today. The lady needs to see a doctor. This conversation is over when I say, Mr. Drummond." Cole's voice dropped not loud or lower, the kind of lower that men who have given their last warning before acting tend to use. "I've been polite. I'd like to continue being polite. But that baby needs a doctor, and this woman needs to leave this building. And if your men make that difficult, I guarantee you the promissory note will be the least of your problems in the morning." A long silence. Drummond looked at Cole, at the 2 hired men who had subtly rearranged themselves toward the far wall, at the woman with the infant, at Jesse, who was watching all of it with those level, unreadable eyes. "We'll continue this matter through proper legal channels," Drummond said finally. His voice was still smooth, but there was something underneath it now, something careful. "Mrs. Calloway, you'll receive notice from my attorney." "I look forward to it," she said. Her voice was iron. Drummond and his men left. The door swung shut. The mercantile went quiet, the particular quiet after threat recedes, when you can suddenly hear your own heartbeat again. The woman's legs gave slightly. She caught herself against the counter. Cole moved, put a hand at her elbow without being asked. "I'm fine," she said immediately. "You're not." He kept his hand where it was. "And that's not a weakness. That's what 2 hours of standing upright against a man like Drummond costs." She looked at him for a moment with those careful brown eyes. Then she looked at Jesse. "You found him." "He found me," Jesse said. "He grabbed your boot," the boy told Cole, like this was important to clarify. "Actually grabbed the boot right in the street." "I know," Cole said. "Most men would have ridden past." Jesse said it without accusation, just as fact. The fact of a child who'd watched too many men ride past. Cole didn't answer that. He looked at the baby. The infant's color was wrong, 2 pale lips slightly dry. "How long since she ate, The woman's jaw tightened. "Since this morning. She's been fussy for 2 days. I thought it was colic, but this afternoon she stopped. I need to get her to Doc Alderman." "Then let's go." The woman looked at him. "You don't need to—" "Mrs. Calloway." Cole said her name like it was a full sentence. "I know I don't need to. I'm choosing to. There's a difference." Something moved through her face. Not quite trust. Trust took longer than this, should take longer than this, but the possibility of trust. A crack in the wall wide enough to let one person through just temporarily, just enough. "Maggie," she said. "My name's Maggie." Doc Alderman's office was on the far end of town. They walked fast, Maggie carrying Clara Jesse at her side, Cole on the outside. He wasn't sure when he'd positioned himself on the outside of the group between them and the street, but he had. Old habit. The kind of habit that lived in your body long after you'd told yourself you were done with the life that built it. People on the boardwalks watched them pass. Not with hostility, not with warmth. With the particular careful neutrality of a town that has decided not to pick sides. Cole had seen that before too. "How long has Drummond been after the property?" he asked, keeping his voice low. Maggie kept her eyes forward. "Since 2 months after Thomas died. Almost a year now." "And the note," He produced it 6 weeks ago. Said Thomas borrowed the money to get through a hard winter, said the payment was due in full. I'd never seen it. Never heard Thomas mention it. Her voice was controlled. My husband was meticulous about debt, Mr. Hargrove. He hated owing money to anyone. He would have told me. What did Thomas die of? A pause. The doctor said heart failure. He was 34 years old. Cole glanced at her. 34. Strong as a draft horse his whole life. Her voice didn't crack, but it came close. He came in from the fence line one afternoon, said he felt tired. By morning, he was gone. She shifted Clara in her arms. I've been told grief makes people imagine things. I've been told I'm looking for someone to blame. Are you imagining things? Another pause. Longer. No, she said quietly. I don't think I am. Jesse walked slightly ahead of them, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the street the way a boy only scans streets when he's learned there might be something in them worth being afraid of. Cole watched the child the way his shoulders sat tight and squared, the way he held his chin up slightly, even with his knees still bleeding through his trousers. He your only boy? Cole asked low. He's 9 years old, Maggie said, going on 40. I noticed. He stopped sleeping through the night after Thomas died. Told me he needed to stay up and listen for things. 9 years old. She looked at Jesse's back. He tried to carry all of it. He still tries. He stood in the mud outside that store for 2 hours without moving. I know. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. I saw him through the window once. He didn't move, didn't cry, just stood there. She paused. Thomas was the same way. Never cried in front of anyone. Called it being strong. I called it being alone. They reached Doc Alderman's, a small building set back from the street. The doctor was in a man of 60 who opened the door before they knocked, which told Cole the man had been watching from the window. Maggie, Alderman said. His eyes went straight to the baby. His face said something he didn't put into words, a careful neutrality that Cole recognized as a man making himself not react until he knew what he was dealing with. She's not eating, Maggie said. She won't wake up properly. Alderman took the infant with practiced hands, carried her to the examination table inside. Cole and Jesse stayed near the door. Maggie stayed at the table's edge, one hand on the wooden surface close enough to touch her daughter if she needed to, not touching, because she was keeping herself together with every bit of willpower she had left. When did this start? Alderman asked, examining the baby without looking up. 3 days ago she started being fussy. 2 days ago she stopped feeding well. This afternoon she just went quiet. Alderman was quiet for a moment. His hands moved carefully. Jesse stood beside Cole. His arms were wrapped around himself, now the first concession to cold he'd made all afternoon. Cole looked at the boy, then took off his trail coat and dropped it around Jesse's shoulders without a word. Jesse looked up at him startled. You're cold, Cole said. I'm fine. You're cold, Cole said again, the same way like the argument was over. Jesse pulled the coat tighter around himself. He didn't say thank you, but he looked at Cole for a moment with an expression that had something complicated in it, something that wasn't hostility and wasn't trust, but was maybe the beginning of the space between the two. She's severely dehydrated, Alderman said. Maggie's hand on the table went white. She needs fluid and warmth and she needs to feed. If she won't take the breast, we'll have to find another way. He looked up. You've been drinking from your well, Maggie. Same well we've always used. And the water's been... He stopped. Tasting any different lately? Maggie's eyes sharpened. Slightly. Metallic. I thought it was the iron in the pipe. Alderman looked at the baby again, and now the thing in his face that he'd been carefully not showing was closer to the surface. Babies this age take in everything through the mother. Whatever's in the water gets passed along. He kept his voice professional, kept it even, but Cole heard what was underneath it. How long has it tasted metallic? 2 months? Maybe 3. Cole looked at Alderman. The doctor looked back at him for exactly 2 seconds, which was long enough. "Fix her first," Cole said. "Then we talk about the rest." Alderman nodded. He went to his cabinet, began preparing what he needed. Maggie hadn't moved from the table's edge. Jesse was watching his baby sister with those ancient eyes. "She's going to be all right," Jesse said, quietly. Not a question. A decision. Nobody confirmed it. Nobody argued with it either. Cole stood near the door of the doctor's office in a town he'd planned to pass through without stopping in a situation that had nothing to do with him, beside a boy who'd grabbed his boot in the street and told him about a baby who hadn't eaten, and thought about all the towns he'd ridden through in 6 years of drifting. All the problems he'd identified and left behind. All the moments where something had tugged at him and he'd tightened the reins and gone forward anyway. He thought about Laramie, 1875. A farmhouse with a midwife who'd come out onto the porch with her hands wrong and said she was sorry. His wife, Sarah. The baby girl they'd decided to name after Sarah's mother. Neither of them making it to morning. Cole sitting on the porch steps until the sun came up. Then, the next night, then riding away from the farm on the 3rd day and never going back. He'd worn a badge for 3 years after that. Figured if he couldn't protect the 2 people he loved most, at least he could protect strangers. Then he stopped being able to do that either, or told himself he stopped and turned in the badge and became something that moved between places without settling in any of them. He looked at Clara on the examination table. 4 months old, wrapped now in a warm cloth Alderman had produced. Her color slightly better already, just from the warmth, just from being somewhere safe. He looked at Jesse, the coat too big around his shoulders, chin still up, arms still tight around himself. Refusing cold, refusing weakness. 9 years old and holding a family together with nothing but stubbornness and the refusal to cry. He looked at Maggie, who still had her hand on the table's edge, who still hadn't let herself fall apart, who was still standing on nothing but the same stubbornness her son had inherited. Thomas Calloway had been 34 years old, strong as a draft horse, tired after the fence line gone by morning, the well-water tasting of metal for 3 months, a promissory note appearing 6 weeks after his death, a land deed worth $800 being seized for a $240 debt. Cole had been a lawman. He knew what patterns looked like when you'd seen enough of them. "Jesse," he said. The boy looked at him. "Did your father ever talk about the water, about it changing?" Jesse was quiet for a moment, the careful quiet of someone deciding how much to trust. He said something, about a month before he died. Said the creek upstream tasted different after the Drummond mill started running. Said he was going to ride up and have a look. Did he? He got sick before he could. Cole's hand found this scar on his right palm, an old one from a barbed wire fence in Colorado, and he pressed it without thinking. The pressure was grounding. It had always been grounding. "Mr. Hargrove," Maggie's voice. He looked over. She was still at the table, but she'd turned slightly toward him now. Her eyes were direct. "Who are you?" "I told you, Cole Hargrove." "You told me a name. Who are you? What are you doing in Caldwell Creek?" "Passing through." People who are passing through don't walk into other people's problems. "I did today." She looked at him for a long moment. "You were a lawman." "Was." "What made you stop?" Cole didn't answer right away. The doctor was working quietly at the table. Jesse was watching Cole with those careful eyes, waiting to see what the man would say. "I lost someone," Cole said finally. "Decided I was done protecting people." Maggie looked at him steadily. "What changed your mind?" Cole looked at Jesse. At the coat that was too big. At the bleeding knees nobody had bandaged yet. At the face of a child who'd stood in the mud for 2 hours without moving in the cold, without crying because someone had to. "Your boy grabbed my boot," Cole said. Maggie's eyes filled just for a moment. She blinked it back, fast, the practiced blink of someone who'd had to blink things back so many times it had become automatic. "He does what needs doing," she said, voice steady again. "Yes," Cole said. "He does." Jesse looked away from both of them, looked back at Clara. His jaw worked slightly. Then he said very quietly, to no one in particular, "Papa used to say, you don't wait for someone worth fighting for. You fight, and then you find out they were worth it after." Nobody in that room had an answer for that. Alderman straightened up from the table. "She's taken a little water. Color's coming back. I want to keep her here through the night, watch her, but I believe she'll stabilize." He looked at Maggie. "You need to rest." "I'm fine." "Maggie." The doctor's voice was gentle but firm. "You're running on empty, and you've got a 9-year-old boy whose knees need cleaning, and tomorrow you're going to need every bit of strength you have. Rest is not weakness. Rest is strategy." Maggie exhaled slow and long, like she'd been holding that breath for 6 months and was only just now letting it go. "There's a room in the back," Alderman said. "You and Jesse take it tonight. I'll check on Clara every hour." Cole looked at Alderman. "I'll take the first watch." Alderman looked at him, then at Maggie, who looked back at Cole with that same careful assessment she'd been doing since the mercantile, the same, measuring the same question underneath all the other questions, which was the oldest question anyone asked about anyone: "Can I trust you?" "The back room locks from the inside," Alderman said. "Good," Cole said. That was all. Jesse walked to the basin in the corner to wash his knees, moving with the careful self-sufficiency of a boy who'd been managing his own wounds for a while. Cole watched him for a moment. Then he pulled a chair to the door and sat down, hat on his knee, and settled in for the night watch. Outside, Caldwell Creek went about its evening business. Lamplight in windows, the sounds of a town getting quiet. And somewhere in that town, Franklin Drummond sat in whatever room powerful men sat in when their plans had been interrupted for the day, not stopped, just delayed, and thought about his next move. Cole knew that kind of man. Knew he'd be back. Knew tomorrow would be harder than today. He looked at Jessie, now sitting on the edge of the examining table near his sister, talking to her quietly, telling her about something about their dog, or the horses, or something a 9-year-old boy talks about to a 4-month-old girl who couldn't understand but could hear the sound of her brother's voice and know she wasn't alone. Cole pressed the scar on his palm again. He'd been 30 seconds too late for Sarah, too late for their daughter who never drew a breath. He was here now. Right now, tonight, in this room with these people. That had to count for something. It had to. Clara made it through the night. That was the first thing Jesse said when Cole opened his eyes at dawn, still in the chair by the door. Neck stiff, hat on his knee, exactly where he'd set it 6 hours ago. The boy was already awake, standing beside his sister's small cot, one finger touching her hand, the way children touch things they're afraid might disappear. "She ate," Jesse said. "A little. Doc Alderman said a little is enough for now." Cole stood, rolled his neck, looked at the infant. Color better, chest moving steady. The particular quality of stillness she'd had yesterday. The wrong kind of stillness was gone. What remained was just sleep. Ordinary sleep. The kind that meant she was fighting and winning. "Good," Cole said. "You stayed all night." "I said I would." Jesse looked at him for a moment. "Most men say things." "I know. Papa said a man's word is the only thing that's really his. Everything else can be taken." Jesse looked back at Clara. "They took almost everything else." Cole pulled on his coat, walked to the basin, washed his face. The water was cold. He didn't mind cold. He'd stopped minding a lot of things in 6 years of sleeping rough. "Where's your mother?" "Still sleeping," Doc said to let her. Jesse paused. "She doesn't sleep much usually. I hear her at night sometimes walking the cabin. She thinks I can't hear her." "But you can. I can hear everything." He said it without pride. Just fact. The fact of a child who'd made himself into a sentry because the alternative was not knowing what was coming. "Mr. Hargrove, what happens today?" Cole dried his hands, looked at the boy. "Drummond's going to move on the property through legal channels. That's what he said. And that's what he'll do. Men like that prefer the law, cheaper than hired guns and harder to fight." "Can we fight it?" "That depends on a few things." "Like what?" "Like whether your father kept records, Documents, letters, anything in writing about the land, about the payment, about any dealings with Drummond. Cole watched Jesse's face. Did he keep records? Jesse thought for a moment. Very still the way he went when he was working something through. Papa had a box, he said. Tin box, kept it under the floorboard in the bedroom. Said it had everything important. Deeds, receipts, letters. Said if anything ever happened, that box had all the answers. Does your mother know about it? I don't know. Maybe. Jesse frowned. After Papa died, men came to the cabin. Said they were from the county land office. Mama let them in because they showed papers. They were in the bedroom for a while. His jaw tightened. I didn't like them. They looked at things too long. Did they take anything? Mama said nothing was missing. Jesse paused. But she didn't know about the box. I only knew because Papa showed me once and said it was between us. Said a man tells his son things he doesn't want to worry his wife with. The boy's voice caught slightly on the word son, then steadied. Maybe they didn't find it. Cole looked at the boy for a moment. Jesse, that box might be the most important thing in the world right now. Jesse met his eyes. I know, he said. That's why I didn't tell Mama last night. I didn't want her to go home alone to get it. Cole was quiet for a moment, looking at this 9-year-old child who had decided in the middle of everything falling apart to protect a piece of information until the right moment. Who had calculated without anyone teaching him how that information was only safe when the person carrying it was safe. Your father taught you well, Cole said. Jesse looked away. Something moved across his face, quick and gone. Not long enough, he said quietly. Maggie appeared in the doorway of the back room, hair loose around her shoulders, dress wrinkled from sleeping in it. She went straight to Clara without looking at anyone else, touched the baby's face, watched her breathe. Her shoulders dropped about an inch. The inch she'd been holding for 18 hours. She's better, Maggie said. She is, Alderman confirmed from across the room, coming in with coffee, 3 cups, handing them out with the practiced efficiency of a man who understood that bodies needed fuel before they could carry minds. She'll need rest and feeding, and I want to see her again in 3 days. But the color's right and she's taking fluid. She'll be all right, Maggie. Maggie took the coffee with both hands, looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at Cole. You stayed. I did. She seemed to be waiting for an explanation. He didn't offer one. After a moment, she just nodded, and the nod said more than she probably intended it to. They ate breakfast at Alderman's table, biscuits the doctor produced from somewhere, dried meat, more coffee. Jesse ate with the controlled focus of a boy who'd learned not to take food for granted, not wasting a bite, not rushing. Maggie ate less than she should have. Cole didn't comment on it. I need to tell you something, Cole said when the plates were cleared. Maggie looked at him. Jesse looked at him. Last night, after you both were asleep, Doc Alderman and I talked. Cole looked at Alderman, who nodded. About the water. About what he's been seeing. Alderman set down his cup. I've treated 4 families in this valley over the past 8 months for symptoms I couldn't properly explain. Tremors. Stomach sickness that didn't respond to normal treatment. Fatigue that went bone deep. He looked at Maggie. Thomas wasn't the only one who got sick, Maggie. He was just the first one who got sick badly enough to die. Maggie's cup stopped halfway to her lips. Who else? The Garner family on the north pasture. Pete Garner's had tremors since spring. The Whitfield children, 2 of them been sickly since summer. Old Ruth Beckett lost 2 horses she couldn't account for. Alderman looked at his hands. And I've been writing it off. Different causes, different explanations. Telling myself it was coincidence. But it's not, Maggie said. No, I don't believe it is. He paused. Drummond's new mill operation started upstream 11 months ago. I've been telling myself the 2 things weren't connected because... He stopped. Because Drummond's a powerful man, Cole said. Alderman didn't argue with that. Because Drummond's a powerful man, he agreed. Maggie set her cup down. Her hands were steady. Her eyes were not angry. Anger was too simple for what was in them. What was in them was the cold, clear recognition of a woman who has suspected something terrible for a long time and just had it confirmed. "They killed my husband," she said. Not a question, not a dramatic statement, just a woman arriving at a fact. "We can't prove that yet," Cole said carefully. "But we can." "If the evidence exists, yes." Jesse had gone completely still. Cole glanced at him. The boy was looking at his mother with an expression Cole hadn't seen from him before, not the careful guardedness, not the ancient steadiness, something raw. Something that was grief and fury and love all compressed into a 9-year-old face with no outlet. "Jesse," Cole said quietly, "tell your mother about the box." Jesse looked at Cole, then at Maggie. He told her. All of it. The tin box, the floorboard the day Thomas had shown him the men from the land office who'd been in the bedroom. Maggie listened without interrupting, her hands flat on the table. When Jesse finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Your father showed you that," she said finally. "Yes, ma'am. He never told me. He said he didn't want you to worry." Something moved through Maggie's face. A complicated thing. Grief layered over love, layered over the particular bittersweet feeling of knowing someone so well, you recognized even the ways they failed you. "That was Thomas," she said softly, "trying to protect me from every hard thing." She paused. He never understood that not knowing was harder than knowing. "We need to go back to the cabin," Cole said. "Get the box before Drummond sends someone to look more carefully." "He'll have men watching the property," Maggie said. "Likely. So how? Not directly." Cole thought for a moment. "Is there a back way in? Through the tree line, avoiding the main road?" Maggie looked at Jesse. Jesse nodded slowly. "Papa and I used to come in through the east wood when we went hunting early. Nobody'd see you from the road. Then that's the way we go." Cole looked at Maggie. "Clara stays here with Alderman. You and Jesse come with me." Maggie looked at her daughter, small and sleeping, and the look on her face was the exact look of a woman choosing between two kinds of fear, the fear of leaving her baby and the fear of losing everything that baby needs to survive. It lasted about 4 seconds. "All right," she said. They left before the town was fully awake, cutting north of the main street, moving through the back lots and empty spaces that every small western town had between the buildings people used and the buildings people forgot. Jesse led without being asked, already knowing the route, moving through it, with the quiet efficiency of a child raised on open land. The cabin sat a mile out of town, small and square, set back from the road with a kitchen garden on one side and a pole fence on the other. 2 horses in the small corral, thin but standing, which meant no one had taken them yet. A man Cole didn't recognize leaned against the fence post near the road, not doing anything, just standing. The particular stance of someone who was being paid to be present. "Drummond's man," Jesse said. Just barely a whisper. "One," Cole said. "Watching the road. He can't see the east wood from there." They circled wide, came through the trees on the far side, moved low along the fence line. The man at the road didn't look their direction. Jesse pushed through a gap in the fence Cole wouldn't have spotted on his own, a loose post Thomas had apparently never gotten around to fixing, or had deliberately left that way. Inside the cabin it was cold. No fire had been lit since Maggie left yesterday morning. The few things on the shelves and table were orderly, the order of someone who cleaned when they could not control anything else. A child's drawing on the wall near the window, a horse, crude and joyful, signed in crooked letters, Jesse, age 7. Maggie went straight to the bedroom. Cole and Jesse followed. She stood in the middle of the room and looked at the floor, then at Jesse. "Show me." Jesse went to the corner near the far wall, counted the boards. Cole watched him count 3 from the wall, 2 from the window, and press down. The board gave slightly a specific give of something that had been lifted and replaced many times. Jesse got his fingers under the edge pulled. The tin box was still there. Maggie knelt, lifted it with both hands, held it for a moment, the way Cole had seen her hold Clara, careful, like it might be fragile. She set it on the bed, opened the latch. Inside documents folded and stacked with Thomas Calloway's meticulous precision. Land deed original with 3 signatures and a county stamp. Receipts. Cole counted 11 each one, recording a payment. Each one dated, each one signed by the party receiving the money. Letters, 3 of them tied together with a piece of wire. And at the bottom, a small notebook, leather cover, the kind a man used for working notes. Maggie picked up the notebook first, opened it. Cole watched her face as she read. He watched the moment she found what she was looking for. The slight parting of her lips, the quick exhale, the eyes going very still. "Thomas," she said, barely sound, just his name. "What is it?" Jessie asked. She held out the notebook. Cole took it, read. Thomas Calloway's handwriting, careful and precise, dated entries going back 11 months. Notes about the water, the taste changing the color on some mornings, the way the horses wouldn't drink from the creek anymore. Notes about his own symptoms, the shaking that started in his right hand, the stomach pains, the fatigue. And notes careful and specific about what he'd observed upstream. Drummond's mill operation, runoff channels, gray water in the creek on 3 separate dates. All of it written down, all of it dated. And on the last page, written in a hand that had clearly been shaking, "I believe Drummond's operation has poisoned our water. I believe it made me sick. If something happens to me, this notebook and the receipts prove the land debt is paid in full. The note Drummond will produce is a lie. Thomas J. Calloway." Cole lowered the notebook. He looked at Maggie. She was crying silently, no sound, just tears running, her hand pressed flat over her mouth. "He knew?" Jessie said. The boy had read over Cole's arm, had read every word. His voice was very quiet. "He knew what was making him sick, and he wrote it all down." "He protected us," Maggie said. She took her hand from her mouth, wiped her face in one quick motion, the motion that had become as automatic as breathing. "Even when he was dying, he was still—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, steadied herself. "He was still trying to take care of us." Cole set the notebook back in the tin box carefully. Looked at the receipts, at the land deed, at the letters he hadn't opened. The letters could wait. "We need to get this somewhere Drummond can't reach it. His men searched this room once. They'll search it again." "Henry Alderman," Maggie said immediately. "He's the only person in this town I trust." "Agreed." Cole closed the box, tucked it under his arm. "We go now before that man at the road decides to check the property." Jessie was already at the door. He stopped, turned back, looked at his mother, standing in the bedroom of the house where his father had died. "Mama," he said. She looked at him. "Papa did good," Jessie said. "He did everything right. He left us what we needed." Maggie looked at her son for a long moment. The grief and love on her face were the same thing, tangled so tight they couldn't be separated anymore. "Yes," she said. "He did." They went back through the east wood, through the gap in the fence, wide around the watching man at the road. When they reached the tree line, Jessie paused, looked back at the cabin, just for a moment. Then he turned and kept walking. Cole walked beside him. Neither of them spoke. Sometimes the right thing was just to walk beside someone and let the silence be what it was. Back at Alderman's, Clara was awake. Not crying, just awake, looking at the ceiling with the unfocused gaze of infants, who seemed to be considering something profound. Maggie went to her, immediately lifted her, held her against her chest, and the way the baby's hand found Maggie's collar and gripped it was the kind of thing that made the room feel like it had more air in it than it did a moment ago. Cole set the tin box on Alderman's table. The doctor looked at it, then at Cole, then opened it, and began reading, without being asked, because Henry Alderman had apparently been waiting a long time to see exactly this kind of evidence, and was not going to waste a moment. Jessie sat in the corner chair, Cole's coat still around his shoulders. He'd been wearing it since the night before, and Cole hadn't asked for it back. The boy sat with his arms on his knees, watching his mother and sister, watching Alderman read, watching Cole, the way he watched everything, steady, measuring, deciding. "Mr. Hargrove," Jessie said. Cole looked at him. "Are you going to leave after this? After you help us?" Cole was quiet for a moment. It was a fair question. It was the right question. It was the question he'd been asking himself since he'd swung down from his horse in front of the mercantile. "I don't know," Cole said. It was the honest answer. Jesse nodded like he'd expected that. Like honesty, even uncomfortable honesty was something he valued over reassurance. "Papa said you can tell a man's character by whether he tells you what you want to hear or what's true." "Your father was right. I know." Jesse looked at his hands, at the scrapes on his knuckles from when he'd grabbed Cole's boot in the mud. "I'm glad you didn't ride past," he said. "Most men would have." "Maybe," Cole said. "No, maybe about it." Jesse looked up direct the way only children and certain rare adults could look at someone. "I watched men ride past all morning. You were the 12th man to come down that street. I grabbed the boot of the 12th man." Cole looked at the boy. "You tried 11 times before me." 11 times. No self-pity, just fact. The first 6 wouldn't stop. The next 4 stopped, and then rode on when I told them what was happening. The 10th man told me to mind my business. The 11th one said my mama should have thought about this before her husband died. Something cold went through Cole's chest. "He said that to you?" "Yes, sir." Cole was quiet for a moment, breathing through it. "You kept going," he said. "After 11 times. You kept asking." Jesse shrugged slightly, but his eyes were serious. "I didn't have a choice. Clara needed to eat." Cole looked at this 9-year-old boy in an oversized trail coat with scraped knuckles and knees that still needed proper bandaging, who had stood in the mud for 2 hours and been turned away 11 times and gotten up and asked a 12th time because his baby sister needed to eat, and thought that he had never in 38 years of living met anyone with more genuine courage. Not the courage that came from not being afraid. The harder kind. The kind that came from being afraid and standing back up anyway because the alternative was worse. Alderman set down the notebook. He looked at Cole. His face had changed. The careful professional neutrality was gone. What had replaced it was the face of a man who had just confirmed something he'd been afraid was true, and found that knowing was both worse and better than not knowing. "This is enough," Alderman said quietly. "This and my medical records for the affected families and testimony about the water, this is enough to take to the Federal Land Office. Possibly to the U.S. Marshal." He paused. "It won't be easy. Drummond has the town judge in his pocket. The sheriff won't move against him." "Then we go over their heads," Cole said. Alderman looked at him. "You'd do that. You'd take this forward." "Someone has to." Maggie turned from where she stood with Clara. She looked at Cole, that same measuring look, but something in it had shifted. The crack in the wall was wider now. "Why?" she said. The same question she'd asked the night before, but different now. Quieter, more real. Cole looked at Jesse, at the coat, at the 11th man who had told a 9-year-old boy that his mother should have thought about this before her husband died. "Because I was the 12th man," Cole said. "And I'd like to do something useful with that." Maggie held his gaze for a long moment. Clara made a small sound against her shoulder. A real sound, the sound of a baby coming back into her own body, and Maggie's eyes filled, and this time, she didn't blink it back. She just let it be standing there with her daughter and her son, and a stranger who had decided to stop being a stranger, and cried the kind of tears that come when something you'd almost stopped believing in turns out to still be possible. Jesse watched his mother cry, and didn't tell her not to. He just sat quietly in the oversized coat and let her have it, because he understood better than most grown men that some things needed to be felt before they could be survived. Outside Caldwell Creek was waking up. Drummond would be in his office by now. The sheriff would be getting his orders. The machinery of a corrupt small town was beginning its daily work. But inside Alderman's office, a tin box sat on a table with 11 months of truth inside it, and 4 people, 1 old doctor, 1 woman who hadn't broken 1 boy who wouldn't give up, and 1 man who'd needed a reason to stop running, were deciding what to do with it. Drummond moved faster than Cole expected. By mid-morning, the sheriff was at Alderman's door. Not Carter, a different man. Sheriff Roy Briggs, 50 years old, thick through the middle, wearing his badge, the way some men wore a collar like it chafed, but they'd stopped noticing. He knocked twice and didn't wait for an answer. Mrs. Calloway. Briggs looked past Alderman, past Cole, straight to Maggie. Judge Holt has issued a temporary property order. You're required to vacate the Calloway homestead by sundown today, pending resolution of the debt claim. Maggie stood with Clara against her shoulder. She didn't flinch. On what grounds? Outstanding debt. Drummond's filed the paperwork proper. The debt is fabricated. I have documentation proving every payment Thomas made. Briggs looked uncomfortable. The specific discomfort of a man who knows he's doing something wrong, but has calculated that the consequences of not doing it are worse. Ma'am, that's a matter for the court to decide. Then let the court decide it. Don't put us out of our home before it does. Judge Holt's order. Judge Holt, Cole said, stepping forward, sits on the board of Drummond Mercantile. I checked this morning. That's a conflict of interest that would void any order he issues in this matter in a federal court. Cole watched Briggs's face. You know that, Sheriff. Which means you know what you're doing right now isn't law enforcement. It's collection work. Briggs's jaw tightened. He looked at Cole the way men looked at other men when they recognized something in them they couldn't easily dismiss. Who are you? Cole Hargrove, former Deputy Marshal, Colorado Territory. Cole said it the same flat way he always said it. Fact, not threat. I've sent a letter to the U.S. Marshal's office in Cheyenne. Should reach them by tomorrow's post. I've also sent a copy of Thomas Calloway's documentation, land receipts, payment records, and his personal account of water contamination from Drummond's mill operation to the Territorial Land Commissioner. He paused. So before you execute that order, I'd think carefully about whose name is on the paperwork. Briggs went very still. Roy, Alderman's voice was quiet. I've got medical records on 4 families showing symptoms consistent with heavy metal poisoning. All of them downstream from Drummond's mill. All of them sick since the mill started running. He looked at the sheriff steadily. Pete Garner's hands shake so bad he can't shoe his own horses anymore. The Whitfield children have missed 6 months of school. Thomas Calloway is in the ground. He paused. You've known these people your whole life. Something moved through Briggs's face. A complicated thing. The internal architecture of a man who had made compromises over a long time, stacking them up small, and telling himself each one was necessary, and was now looking at the full weight of the stack. I have my orders, Briggs said. But his voice had changed, lost its official flatness. And I have mine, Cole said. Mine come from a dead man's notebook and a 9-year-old boy who grabbed my boot in the street because he'd already been turned away 11 times. He held Briggs's eyes. Execute that order, Roy, and your name is on every document that goes to Cheyenne. Don't, and you're the man who held the line when it mattered. The room was very quiet. Jesse hadn't moved from his corner chair. He was watching the sheriff with those level eyes, and Briggs, Cole noticed, couldn't look at the boy directly. Finally, Briggs put his hat back on. I'll tell Holt there was a procedural issue with the paperwork. He turned to go, stopped at the door. Without turning around, Drummond's not going to let this sit, Hargrove. You understand that? I'm counting on it, Cole said. Briggs left. The door closed. Alderman let out a long breath. Jesse uncrossed his arms. He'll tell Drummond everything you just said, Maggie said. Her voice was careful, not afraid, just precise. Yes, Cole said. That's the point. She looked at him. You want Drummond to come at you directly. I want Drummond off balance. Men like that run on control. They don't function well when the situation stops going the way they planned. Cole looked at the tin box on the table. We need one more thing before this goes to federal court. The water samples. Thomas mentioned collecting samples in the notebook, Maggie said. He mentioned wanting to, whether he had time. Cole opened the notebook again, turned to the final entries. There are 2 lines near the bottom of the last page, the handwriting deteriorating, barely legible. Collected samples, 3 jars, hidden with the box, below the board. Below the board, Jesse said. He'd crossed the room without anyone noticing, was reading over Cole's arm again. He didn't put them in the tin box. Below it, Cole looked at the boy. There's a space under where the box was sitting. Jesse was already moving toward the door. "Jesse," Maggie started. "I'll be fast." He looked at Cole. "Come with me." They went back the same way, Eastwood gap in the fence, low along the fence line. The man at the road had been joined by a second one. Drummond had moved resources. Cole noted their positions, the angles, the blind spots. There were still blind spots. Inside the cabin, back to the bedroom, back to the loose floorboard. Jesse pulled the board, reached into the space where the tin box had been, reached further back, fingers searching. His face changed. He pulled out a cloth bundle, carefully wrapped, tied with kitchen string, the way someone who didn't have proper equipment improvises. 3 glass jars, inside each one, sealed with wax, each one labeled in Thomas's handwriting. Well water, creek upstream, creek downstream, dated 11 months ago. Jesse held them like they were made of something more fragile than glass. "He really did it," Jesse said, very quiet. "He really got the samples." "He did everything right," Cole said, the same words Maggie had used. He meant them the same way she had. Jesse looked at the jars for a moment. "Will they still be good after all this time?" "For what we need them for, yes." Cole took the bundle carefully. "The contamination doesn't disappear. It just sits there. Patient." He looked at the boy. "Like the truth." They went back out the way they came. When they reached the tree line, Cole paused. The second man at the road had moved, was now walking the fence perimeter, slow, looking at the ground, looking for tracks. "He's going to find the gap," Jesse said. "In about 10 minutes, Cole agreed. "We need to be gone." They moved faster, not running, the specific not running of people who know that running draws attention. Back into town through the rear lots, back to Alderman's. When they came through the door, Maggie looked at what Jesse was carrying and pressed one hand flat over her heart. Alderman examined all 3 jars. "I can test these for heavy metal content. My equipment is basic but sufficient for preliminary findings. If they show what Thomas believed they'd show." He set them down carefully. "This, combined with the medical records and the payment documentation, is a case, Cole. A real one. How long to test? 2 hours, maybe 3. Then start now." Alderman started now. The 2 hours that followed were the particular kind of slow that happened when everything important was happening in another room, and all you could do was wait. Jesse sat on the floor near Clara's cot with a piece of paper Alderman had given him, and drew horses, bad ones, the kind 9-year-olds drew, each one distinct and joyful. He named them as he drew them quietly for Clara, who watched his moving hand with the focused attention of a baby, discovering that the world contained things that moved on purpose. Cole sat by the window, not watching the street obsessively, just aware of it the way he'd trained himself to be aware of spaces over years of law work. Watching without appearing to watch. Maggie sat at the table. She'd asked Alderman for pen and paper and was writing, careful and deliberate, the scratch of the pen, the only sound in the room besides Jesse's quiet naming of horses. Cole didn't ask what she was writing. 20 minutes in, she set the pen down, folded the paper, looked at it. "I wrote down everything Thomas told me about the water," she said. "Everything he said when he first noticed. The dates, I remember the conversations. It's not evidence exactly, but it's testimony." She looked at the folded paper. "His voice is in it. The things he said, the exact words he used. I've been afraid of forgetting them." She paused. "Writing them down means I won't." Cole looked at her. "He'd be glad you did. I'm doing it for me, too." She didn't apologize for that. "I need to feel like I'm fighting with something, not just waiting." "You are fighting. Writing testimony is fighting." She looked at him directly. "You've done this before. Gathered evidence, built a case against someone powerful." "Yes." "How did it end?" Cole was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes well, sometimes not." He looked at the window. The ones where it ended well all had the same thing in common. "What's that?" People willing to stand up and say out loud what everybody already knew. He looked back at her. "The evidence opens the door. The people have to walk through it." Maggie looked at the folded paper in her hands. The Garner family, the Whitfields, Ruth Beckett. If they knew about the samples about Thomas's notebook, they might stand, or they might be too afraid. She set the paper down. Drummond employs half this town, directly or indirectly. Standing against him means risking everything. So does not standing. Cole thought about Briggs at the door, about the discomfort in the man's face, about the moment he'd looked away from Jesse. Some of them know it. The door opened without a knock. Not Briggs this time. Franklin Drummond himself. He came in alone, which surprised Cole more than anything else could have. He'd expected lawyers, hired men, the machinery of power. Instead, just Drummond hat in hand, the well-dressed man from the Mercantile, but something different in his face today. The smoothness was still there, the practiced authority. But underneath it, something that looked almost like a man who'd been doing arithmetic and didn't like the answer. Jesse was on his feet before the door was fully open, standing between Drummond and his sister's cot, not aggressive, not theatrical, just there. A 9-year-old boy putting himself between a threat and his family with the absolute uncomplicated clarity of someone who has decided what he's for. Drummond looked at the boy, then looked away. "Mrs. Calloway," Drummond said. "Mr. Hargrove." He glanced at Alderman's closed laboratory door. "I'd like to speak plainly." "You've been speaking plainly since the beginning," Maggie said. "That hasn't been the problem." Drummond looked at her. The patience of a blade quality was gone from his voice today. In its place was something more unguarded, a man recalculating under pressure. "I understand former Deputy Marshal Hargrove has contacted the Federal Land Office." "Among others," Cole said. "That will invite scrutiny that affects this entire town, not just me. Drummond Mercantile employs 60 people. The mill employs 20 more. A federal investigation shuts all of that down while it proceeds. Families go without wages. Children go without food." "Children are already going without food," Maggie said. Her voice was very quiet. "My daughter went without food for 2 days. Because of your mill's runoff in our water. Because of a forged debt note with my dead husband's name on it." Drummond's jaw tightened. "Thomas Calloway paid every dollar he owed. This county paid it clean. And you know it," Maggie continued. "You know it, because the man who forged that note works for you." "That's an allegation." "It's a fact. Thomas wrote it down. He wrote all of it down." She stood up from the table. She wasn't tall, and Drummond had 30 years and 80 pounds on her, but the quality of her stillness made him take a half step back without appearing to notice he'd done it. "My husband spent his last weeks on Earth shaking and sick and dying, writing down everything he'd observed and everything he believed and signing his name to it. Because he knew you'd come for us after he was gone. And he wanted to make sure we'd have what we needed." The room was quiet. "He was right," Drummond said finally. He said it like it cost him something. "Thomas Calloway was a careful man." "The best man I've ever known," Maggie said. "Careful and honest and stubborn enough to document his own death." She picked up the folded paper, the testimony she'd written, set it on top of the tin box. "He did your work for you, Mr. Drummond. He built the case. We're just presenting it." Drummond looked at the tin box, at the papers, at Alderman's closed door behind which the water samples were being tested. He looked at Cole, who was standing near the window, with his hands loose at his sides, not touching his gun, not needing to. "What do you want?" Drummond said. The smoothness was entirely gone now. Just a man asking a question. "The debt note destroyed," Cole said. "Publicly, before witnesses. The property claim withdrawn. The deed returned to Mrs. Calloway, clear and unencumbered." He paused. "And the mill's runoff channel redirected, properly. Engineered, not patched, with independent verification. Redirecting the channel would cost less than a federal environmental investigation and the lawsuit that follows it." Cole held Drummond's eyes. "You're a businessman. Do the arithmetic." Drummond did the arithmetic. Cole could see him doing it, the slight movements of a man running numbers in his head, weighing outcomes, calculating risks. Alderman's door opened. The doctor came out holding a piece of paper, his test results written in his careful physician's hand. He looked at the paper, looked at Drummond, looked at Cole. Mercury, Alderman said. Well, water shows concentration of 380 parts per million. Creek water downstream of the mill shows 420. He set the paper on the table beside the tin box. Upstream sample is clean, 8 parts per million, well within normal range. He looked at Drummond. The mill's runoff is the source. Thomas Calloway was right. The silence that followed was the kind that came after something irreversible. Drummond looked at the test results. His face worked through something private and slow. Cole watched him and thought about the arithmetic again, the kind that had nothing to do with money. The arithmetic of a man counting up the distance between who he thought he was and who he'd actually been. The Garner family, Drummond said. His voice had changed entirely. Gone flat, gone inward. Pete Garner worked for my father for 15 years. Nobody answered that. The Whitfield children. He stopped, pressed his mouth together. I have children. 3 of them. They live in Denver with their mother. He looked at Maggie. I want you to know that I did not, when I started the mill operation, I didn't know the runoff. He stopped again. That doesn't matter, does it? No, Maggie said. It doesn't. A man died. My husband died. My daughter was poisoned. 9 families in this valley have been sick for almost a year. She looked at him steadily. Whatever you knew, and when you knew it, that's what's true. Drummond picked up Alderman's test results. Read them again, though Cole doubted he was reading them so much as looking at them. Holding the paper the way people held things when they needed something to hold. Then he set it down. I'll have my attorney draw up the withdrawal paperwork today, he said. The deed will be returned by tomorrow morning. He looked at Cole. The channel, I'll need an engineer. It'll take 3 weeks minimum. 3 weeks with work starting tomorrow, Cole said. Verified by Doc Alderman. Drummond nodded once. He picked up his hat, which he'd been holding the entire time, had never put it on, like some part of him had known coming in that this wasn't that kind of conversation. He looked at Jesse, who was still standing near Clara's cot. The boy looked back at him without expression. I'm sorry, Drummond said. He said it to Jesse, not to Maggie, not to Cole, to the boy. Like he understood on some level that the person in the room he'd wronged most irreversibly was a 9-year-old who'd lost his father and spent the morning carrying his baby sister's survival on his back. Jesse looked at him for a long moment. Saying sorry doesn't bring my papa back, he said. No, Drummond said. It doesn't. Jesse looked at Clara, then back at Drummond. But fixing the water keeps my sister from getting sicker, he said. So do that. Drummond left. This time when the door closed, the quality of the silence was different from every time it had closed before. Cole looked at Maggie. She had both hands pressed flat on the table, leaning on them like she needed the solid surface under her. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying, or she was crying, but it wasn't the kind that made sound. The kind that was just the body releasing pressure that had been building for 11 months. Is it over? Jesse asked. This part, Cole said. What's the next part? Cole thought about Drummond's attorney and the paperwork. About the sheriff who'd have to be told. About the federal letters he'd sent that would still arrive in Cheyenne and would still prompt questions. And those questions would need answers. And the answers would need people willing to give them in public, in writing on record. He thought about Pete Garner's shaking hands and the Whitfield children and Ruth Beckett's dead horses. The next part is making sure what happened here doesn't just go away, he said. Drummond backing down is one thing. The record of why he backed down is another. The federal investigation should still proceed. Not to destroy him, to make sure there's documentation, so it can't be quietly undone in 6 months. And you'll stay for that, Maggie said. Not a question. Something more careful than a question, something that held more weight. Cole looked at her. At Jesse, who was holding Clara. Now the baby settled against his narrow chest. One small fist wrapped around his collar. The boy was looking at Cole with those ancient, careful, honest eyes. He thought about the 11 men who'd ridden past, about the 12th man, which was him, which he'd never planned to be. He thought about Sarah, about the farmhouse in Laramie, about 6 years of roads leading nowhere in particular. He thought about a tin box under a floorboard, and a man who'd spent his dying weeks writing down the truth so his family would have what they needed. Thomas Calloway had done everything right, had trusted that it would be enough, had trusted that there would be someone eventually to receive what he'd left. Cole was that someone. He hadn't asked for it. He'd grabbed it by accident when he stopped in Caldwell Creek because a boy with ancient eyes wouldn't let go of his boot. "I'll stay," Cole said. Jesse didn't smile. He just looked at Cole for a long moment with Clara in his arms, and then he nodded, once the nod of someone who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time and has finally found a second pair of hands willing to take part of the weight. Outside, Caldwell Creek was moving through its midday ordinary rhythms. But something had shifted in the machinery of the town. Some gear had slipped some weight, redistributed itself, and the people who paid attention to such things could feel it, even if they couldn't name it yet. And in Pete Garner's house on the North Pasture, and in the Whitfield place, and in Ruth Beckett's kitchen, there were people who had been waiting a long time for someone to tell them that the thing they knew was true was actually true, and that knowing it was no longer going to cost them everything. They just didn't know that yet. The paperwork arrived the next morning the way Drummond promised. His attorney, a thin man named Howell, who looked like he hadn't slept, appeared at Alderman's door at 8 a.m., with the withdrawal documents and the original Calloway land deed in a leather folder. He set them on the table without ceremony, got Maggie's signature on the withdrawal acknowledgement, and left without meeting anyone's eyes. The forged promissory note was attached to the back of the withdrawal stamped void in red ink, which meant someone had already decided the cleanest path was to make it disappear rather than explain it. Cole looked at the stamped note for a long moment after Howell left. Maggie held the deed with both hands. She turned it over, looked at Thomas's signature on the original filing, ran her thumb across the letters, the way you touched something you'd been afraid you'd lost permanently. "It's real," she said. "It's actually real." "It's yours," Cole said. "Always was." Jesse was at the table eating breakfast, or had been eating before Howell arrived, and the room had gone still. Now, he was looking at the deed in his mother's hands with an expression that was trying very hard to be 9 years old, and kept falling short of it. "Does this mean we can go home?" he asked. "Yes," Maggie said. "Today. Today." Jesse looked at his plate. He picked up his fork and finished his breakfast with the same controlled focus he brought to everything. But his shoulders had dropped about an inch, and the set of his jaw was different. And when Clara made a small sound from her cot across the room, he looked over at her with something that was purely and simply the face of a boy who had just exhaled for the first time in a very long time. Cole went to see Pete Garner that morning, while Maggie and Jesse packed what little they'd brought to Alderman's. He rode north to the Garner property alone, which was a piece of land that had once been productive and was showing the signs of a man who couldn't work it properly anymore. Tools left out. Fence mended badly, the kind of mending done by someone whose hands shook through the work. Pete Garner himself answered the door looking 10 years older than whatever age he actually was, a man somewhere in his 40s, who had the face of someone living in chronic pain and chronic uncertainty, which were the same thing dressed differently. Cole told him about the samples, about the test results, about Drummond's withdrawal and the agreement to reroute the mill channel. He showed Garner the copy of Alderman's findings, the numbers, the concentrations, the clean upstream reading against the poisoned downstream. Pete Garner read the paper twice. He had to hold it with both hands to keep it steady. When he looked up, his eyes were red, not from crying from the particular rawness of a man who has been told his pain is real after a long time of having it dismissed. "I thought I was losing my mind," Garner said. "A year ago, my hands started shaking, and Doc Alderman said it might be nerves, might be age, might be a dozen things. My wife thought maybe I was drinking, and I wasn't, but I understood why she thought it, because I couldn't explain what was happening to my own body." He looked at his hands. "You're telling me it was the water?" "The water," Cole said. "The same water that killed Thomas Calloway." Garner was quiet for a long moment. "Thomas told me once that he thought the mill was the cause, right before he got real sick. I told him he was grasping, that Drummond wouldn't do something that affected his own neighbors. He set the paper down on his knee. I should have listened. You're listening now. What do you need from me? The federal investigation is going to proceed regardless. But testimony from affected families makes it impossible to quietly shelve. I need you to make a written statement to the U.S. Marshal's office about your symptoms, the timeline, the connection to the mill. Cole looked at him steadily. And I need you to be willing to say it in public, if it comes to that. Garner looked at his hands again. At the shaking that had become so ordinary, he'd stopped noticing it except in moments like this when someone else's eyes were on it. Drummond employs my brother-in-law, he said. Has for 12 years. I know. If I stand up, my brother-in-law could lose his position. He could, Cole said. I won't tell you that's a small thing. Garner was quiet. Cole waited the way he'd learned to wait through years of law work, without filling the silence because some decisions needed their full space to be made properly. Thomas Calloway was my neighbor for 8 years, Garner said finally. He helped me dig my well the first summer I was here, worked 3 days without pay because that's who he was. He folded Alderman's paper, carefully handed it back to Cole. My brother-in-law is a grown man. He can find other work. He paused. I'll make the statement, and I'll say it in public if it comes to that. Cole rode to the Whitfield family next, then to Ruth Beckett, then to 2 other families Alderman had mentioned the previous night, when the 3 of them had sat at his kitchen table after Maggie and Jesse were asleep and mapped out what the next days needed to look like. By mid-afternoon, Cole had 4 written statements in his coat pocket, each one signed, each one dated, each one specific about symptoms and timelines and the correlation with the mill operation. He rode back to the Calloway property as the sun began its western descent. The cabin was alive in a way it hadn't been yesterday. Smoke from the chimney. Maggie's horse in the corral coat, already looking better after a day of proper feed. Jesse in the yard, splitting wood, the methodical rhythm of a boy who'd been given a physical task and was working it out of his system. Dusty the Garner's old hound, who'd apparently adopted Jesse sometime in the past 2 days, with the unilateral decision-making of dogs everywhere, was sitting at his feet, watching each piece of wood fall with the serious attention of a dog who'd found his purpose. Jesse looked up when Cole rode in. He set the axe down and came to take the horse without being asked, which was something he'd started doing that morning. Small practical acts of accommodation that were his version of something he hadn't found words for yet. How many? Jesse asked. 4 families, 4 statements. Jesse nodded. Mr. Garner came by an hour ago. Talked to Mama. He was in there a long time. He looked toward the cabin. I could hear them through the window sometimes. He was crying. I've never seen Mr. Garner cry. People cry when they find out the thing that was wrong with them has a name, Cole said. When they find out they weren't imagining it. Jesse considered this. Is that what you did when you found out your wife died? Did you cry? Cole looked at the boy. Jesse asked things directly without cushioning, not from cruelty, but from the habit of a child who'd learned that indirect questions got incomplete answers and he needed complete ones. Not right away, Cole said. The crying came later. The first thing was just nothing, like the world had gone silent. Jesse was quiet for a moment. That's what happened when Papa died. For about 3 days. Everything went real quiet and I couldn't hear anything properly. He looked at the wood he'd been splitting. Then the quiet went away and all the loud things came back. All the things that needed doing. All the things Mama needed. And I just did them. You were 9 years old. I was still 9 years old, Jesse said. Like this was a distinction without meaningful difference. He took Cole's horse toward the corral, over his shoulder. Mama made supper. She said to tell you it's ready when you are. Inside the cabin had been put back together with the particular thoroughness of a woman reclaiming her own space after it had been threatened. Everything clean. Everything in its place. Clara in her cradle near the fire, awake and calm, following light with her eyes the way babies did when they were healthy enough to be curious. The difference between Clara today and Clara 2 days ago in Alderman's office was the difference between a flame about to go out and a flame with fuel. Maggie was at the stove, She didn't turn around when Cole came in, just said, "Wash up, it's almost ready." Cole washed at the basin, dried his hands on the cloth hanging beside it, looked at Thomas Calloway's drawing on the wall that Jesse had made at age 7, the horses, the crooked letters, looked at the shelf with Thomas's books carefully kept, looked at the tin box sitting on the corner of the table, its work done no longer needed to be hidden. "Pete Garner cried in my kitchen," Maggie said. She was still at the stove. Her voice was careful in the way it got when she was talking about something that had moved her, and she wasn't ready to fully acknowledge how much. "He sat at this table where Thomas used to sit and put his face in his hands and cried for 10 minutes. Didn't apologize for it, just cried." She paused. Thomas would have put his hand on Pete's shoulder. That's what Thomas did when someone was hurting. He just put his hand there and left it. "Sounds like a good man," Cole said. "He was the best man." She said it simply, without the fragility it had carried when she first said it days ago. Now it was just a fact she'd made peace with carrying. "He also drove me absolutely crazy. He was stubborn as a post, and he kept things from me he thought would worry me, and he worked himself half to death before he'd ask for help." She turned from the stove, set a pot on the table, looked at Cole. "Sound familiar?" Cole almost smiled. "I wouldn't know. You slept in a chair for 2 nights rather than mention you needed a proper bed. The chair was fine. The chair was not fine. I could hear your neck cracking from the back room." She sat down across from him. "You also sent letters to 3 different federal offices without telling me you were doing it because you didn't want me to get my hopes up in case nothing came of it." Cole looked at her. "How did you know about the letters?" "Alderman told me. He helped you write 2 of them." She held his eyes. "I understand why you did it that way. I'm not angry. I just want you to know that I'd rather carry the weight of uncertain hope than not know what's being done on my behalf." She paused. "Thomas kept things from me to protect me. It always cost more than it saved." "Noted," Cole said. "I mean it. If we're—" She stopped, adjusted. "If you're staying here and helping with this, I need to know what's happening. All of it. Even the parts that might not work." "All right. All right." She looked at him for a moment, something measuring and warm in equal proportion. Then she called Jesse in for supper. They ate together, the 3 of them, with Clara in her cradle, making small sounds that punctuated the conversation like a 4th party with strong opinions and limited vocabulary. Jesse talked more than he had in 2 days about the wood he'd split about Dusty, about a loose board on the porch he'd noticed and thought he could fix tomorrow if someone showed him the right way to do it. It was the most 9-year-old thing Cole had heard from him, the ordinary ambition of a child who wanted to fix a board, and it was better than almost anything else Cole had heard in recent memory. "I'll show you in the morning," Cole said. Jesse looked at him. "You know carpentry. Enough." Papa knew a lot of carpentry. He built the shelves in the kitchen. Jesse glanced at the shelves. He said a man who could build things would never be without work. He was right. "Can you teach me other things too? Not just the board. Other things he would have taught me." Jesse said it without sentimentality, straight and practical. "There's a lot he didn't get to teach me yet. I've been trying to figure some of it out alone, but I get it wrong sometimes, and there's nobody to ask." The table went quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet. The quiet of 3 people sitting with something that mattered. "Yes," Cole said. "I'll teach you." Jesse nodded, satisfied, and went back to his supper. Maggie looked at her plate. Her jaw worked slightly. The muscle near her ear, the tell Cole had learned, meant she was holding something together that wanted to come apart. She held it together. She always held it together. After supper, Jesse did the washing up, another thing he'd apparently decided was his responsibility, and Maggie sat with Clara, feeding her the lamp warm on both their faces. Cole sat near the door with Thomas's notebook open in his lap, not reading it, just holding it, thinking about the next week. The U.S. Marshal would send someone in response to the letters, probably within 10 days. Drummond's engineer needed to be verified starting tomorrow. The written statements from the 4 families needed to be formally notarized before they went to Cheyenne. Briggs needed to be officially informed of the federal involvement so he couldn't claim later that he hadn't known. There was a great deal of work still ahead, the kind that didn't happen in courtrooms or confrontations, but in the slow, unglamorous accumulation of documented truth. Cole was familiar with that kind of work, had been good at it once, was finding that it came back to him the way things you'd done long enough always came back, like writing, like reading a room, like knowing when silence was more useful than words. "You're making a list in your head," Maggie said. He looked up. Jesse had gone outside to check on the horses before bed, the responsibility he'd assigned himself without being asked. Clara was asleep against Maggie's shoulder. "Tomorrow," Cole said. "Drummond's engineer, the notarization's Briggs. And after that, the marshal's response. Depending on what they send, there may be a formal hearing. Probably will be." Maggie was quiet for a moment. "Thomas used to do that, make lists in his head at night. I'd watch his eyes go somewhere else, and I'd know he was planning something, working through steps." She looked at Cole. "It used to frustrate me when we were first married. I thought he'd gone somewhere I couldn't follow." "Did it stop frustrating you?" "I learned to ask him to say the list out loud. Then we could both work through it." She paused. "So say the list out loud." Cole looked at her for a moment. Then he said the list out loud. All of it in order, with the contingencies and the uncertainties included the way she'd asked. She listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she said, "The notary is Elias Webb, 2 streets over from the Mercantile. He owes Thomas a favor from years back, a land survey Thomas helped him with. He'll do it quickly and without asking too many questions." She paused. "And Roy Briggs went to school with Thomas. They weren't close, but there was always respect there. If you talk to him alone without making it a confrontation, I think he'll cooperate." "You know this town," Cole said. "I've lived here for 9 years. I know every fault line." She shifted Clara gently. "Thomas and I used to joke that I was the one who understood people, and he was the one who understood land. Between the two of us, we had one complete picture." She stopped. The thing behind her eyes went private for a moment, then came back. "I've been working with half a picture for 11 months. Cole looked at the notebook in his lap, at Thomas Calloway's careful handwriting on the cover. "He left good instructions," Cole said. "Everything he documented, every sample he took, it reads like a man who knew exactly what he was doing and who he was doing it for." "He was doing it for Jesse," Maggie said. "And for Clara, even though she wasn't born yet when he got sick. He told me once near the end that he needed to leave something that would make them safe, that if he couldn't be here to protect them himself, he needed to leave protection behind." She looked at her daughter's sleeping face. "He left a better case than most lawyers could have built." "Yes," Cole said, "he did." The fire had burned low. Jesse came back in from checking the horses, reported that both were settled, and the latch on the corral gate was stiff, and he'd fixed it with a piece of wire, set it like he was filing a report, practical and complete. Maggie told him to wash his hands and go to bed. He went without argument, which Cole suspected was unusual enough to note. At the door to his room he stopped. "Mr. Hargrove," Jesse said. "Yeah, the board on the porch, the loose one." He was serious. "Don't fix it without me." "I won't." Jesse went to bed. The cabin was quiet, just the fire, and Clara breathing, and the sound of the Wyoming night outside, wind in the grass, distant coyote. The ordinary sounds of a place that had survived another day. Maggie carried Clara to her cradle. When she came back, she stood near the fire for a moment, not quite ready to end the evening, not quite ready to name why. "He asked you to teach him things," she said. "Jesse, he doesn't ask people for things, ever. I noticed. He asked you." She looked at the fire. "He's been trying to be Thomas for 11 months. Trying to carry what Thomas carried, protect what Thomas would have protected. He's 9 years old, and he's been trying to be the man of a house that shouldn't need a man of a house, it should need a boy." Her voice was careful and precise. "He grabbed your boot in the street, and I don't think he was just asking for help with Drummond." Cole understood what she was saying. He sat with it, the weight of it, what it meant, and what it asked of him. "Maggie." He said her name quietly. "I'm not going to make promises I don't know how to keep. I know. I don't know yet what this looks like, going forward, what I'm capable of. I know that too. She looked at him. I'm not asking you to be Thomas. Nobody could be Thomas, and nobody should try. She paused. I'm asking you to be whoever you actually are. Honestly, without performing something you're not. She looked at her daughter's cradle. Jesse has a good eye for performance. He sees through it immediately. But he can't see through you, and that matters. Cole looked at the fire, at the shelf Thomas had built. At the cradle Thomas had built, he realized, looking at it properly for the first time, the careful joinery, the small carved detail along the edge, a man building something for a child he'd known he might not live to see grow up. The scar on his palm pressed against the notebook's cover. Sarah, their daughter, who never breathed. 6 years of roads leading nowhere. And here, this kitchen, this fire, this family that had been broken open and was still standing, held together by the stubbornness of a woman and the courage of a boy, and the truth a good man had spent his dying days carefully writing down. Cole wasn't Thomas Calloway, would never be Thomas Calloway. But he was the 12th man, the one who'd stopped. I'll be here tomorrow, he said, for the board on the porch, for the notary and Briggs and the engineer, and after that I'll be here for whatever comes next. He looked at her. That's what I can promise right now. Maggie held his eyes for a long moment. Whatever she was looking for, she apparently found it, because the last of the careful measuring went out of her expression, and what replaced it was something quieter and more real, something that had no name yet, but was the beginning of needing one. That's enough, she said. That's exactly enough. Outside, the Wyoming night settled over Caldwell Creek, like a hand laid gently over something fragile and worth protecting. In the houses of 4 families, 4 signed statements sat on 4 different tables waiting for morning. In the corral, 2 horses stood in the dark coats already fuller from 2 days of proper feed. On the porch, 1 loose board waited for a boy and a man to fix it together. And in the cabin, the fire burned steady and low, the way fires did when they had what they needed to last through the night. The loose board on the porch took 20 minutes. Jesse held the nails while Cole set them, and Cole showed him the angle, the reason for the angle, the way wood moved with weather and needed room to do it, or it cracked. Jesse listened, the way he listened to everything, completely storing it, asking one precise question when something wasn't clear. When the last nail was set, Jesse tested the board with his foot, pressed, it stepped on it, fully satisfied himself it was solid. Papa would have done it the same way, Jesse said. How do you know? Because it makes sense. Jesse picked up the hammer, turned it in his hands. Papa always said if something made sense, it was probably right. If it didn't make sense, you weren't seeing it clearly yet. Cole took the hammer back, set it in the toolbox. Smart man, the smartest. Jesse looked at the board. He's going to miss a lot, he said. Not grief exactly. More like an accounting, a boy tallying what was owed. He's going to miss Clara walking. He's going to miss teaching me to ride proper. He's going to miss... He stopped. A lot of things. Cole sat on the porch step. Jesse sat beside him, the way he'd started doing naturally without calculation. Dusty arranged himself across both their feet with the complete confidence of a dog who had decided this was his place and the matter was settled. He's not going to miss knowing you were all right, Cole said. He made sure of that before he went. The notebook, the samples, the box under the floor. He did all of that so he'd know. Cole looked at the boy. You understand what I mean. Jesse was quiet for the moment. He couldn't stay, but he made sure we'd be okay before he left. Yes. Jesse nodded slowly. That's something, I guess. He looked at his hands, the scrapes nearly healed now, 2 weeks' worth of healing visible in the pink newness of the skin. It's not enough, but it's something. It was the most honest thing Cole had heard said about grief in a long time, maybe ever. He didn't try to improve on it. The U.S. Marshal arrived 11 days after Cole's letters. His name was Garrett Hale, 45 years old, trail-weathered, the kind of federal man who'd been doing the work long enough that he'd stopped needing to look impressive and just looked competent instead, which was more useful. He came into Caldwell Creek on a Thursday morning with 2 deputies and went directly to Alderman's office where Cole had arranged to meet him. Hale read the documentation for 40 minutes without speaking. Thomas's notebook, the test results, the 4 family statements, the original land deed alongside the voided forgery, Maggie's written testimony, Alderman's medical records. He read all of it in order with the focused attention of a man who understood that what he was reading had cost people significantly. When he finished, he set the papers down and looked at Cole. "Former Deputy Marshal." "Yes, sir." "Colorado Territory. 6 years." Hale looked at the papers again. "This is thorough work, Hargrove. Clean chain of evidence. Testimony properly collected." He paused. "Drummond's attorney already sent a letter to our office in Cheyenne claiming this was a civil land dispute being deliberately escalated." "The water test results aren't a civil land dispute," Cole said. "No, they're not." Hale looked at Alderman's findings at the numbers. 380 parts per million in the well. A man is dead. 4 families showing documented symptoms. He closed the folder. "This is a federal matter, and Drummond's attorney knows it, which is why he tried to get ahead of it." He looked at Cole. "Where is Drummond now?" "In town. He's been cooperative since the confrontation. The mill channel rerouting started 8 days ago. I've had Alderman verify progress every other day." Hale raised an eyebrow. "He started remediation before a federal order." "He did the arithmetic," Cole said. "Decided cooperation was cheaper. Smart man. Doesn't change the legal exposure, but it'll matter in the proceedings." Hale gathered the folder. "I'll need to meet with Mrs. Calloway, and with each of the families who gave statements. They're expecting you." Hale looked at Cole for a moment with the evaluating look of a man who'd assessed many other men over a long career. "You settled here?" "It appears so. Good land in this valley from what I saw riding in." Hale picked up his hat. "Territory needs men who know the law and choose to use it rather than hide from it." He paused at the door. "Think about the badge again, Hargrove. I mean that." Cole didn't answer. Hale left. Cole sat alone in Alderman's office for a moment in the chair where he'd spent the first night watching a door and thought about the badge, about what wearing one had meant and what it had cost and what, if anything, had changed. He thought about Jesse fixing a corral latch with wire in the dark. He thought about Clara's fist around Maggie's collar. He thought about a tin box under a floorboard and a man who'd spent his dying days making sure his family would have what they needed. He went to find Maggie. She was in the kitchen garden when he got back to the property on her knees in the dirt, working through the overgrowth that had accumulated in the months she'd been too stretched to manage it. Her hands were dark with soil. She worked with the efficient intensity she brought to everything, systematic, focused, not wasting motion. Jesse was on the far side of the garden, pulling dead growth, Dusty patrolling the perimeter of the fence, with the seriousness of a dog who'd assigned himself border security duties. Maggie looked up when Cole rode in. She read his face before he spoke. "How was Hale?" Cole dismounted, tied his horse, walked to the garden fence. "Solid. He'll conduct a full investigation. Drummond has legal exposure he can't buy his way out of. The remediation he started is going to be taken into consideration. But the fraud, the forged note, the falsified land claim, that's federal territory. It's not going away." Maggie sat back on her heels. She was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "Thomas?" "Yes." "He built the case. Hale said it." "I said it," Hale agreed. Cole looked at her steadily. Everything Hale needed was already there. Thomas made sure of it. Maggie looked at her hands in the soil. Something moved through her face, the complicated thing it always was when she thought about Thomas' love and grief and pride all pressing against each other in a space too small for all of them at once. She'd gotten better at wearing it without cracking. Not because it hurt less, because she'd made room for it. "Okay," she said, quietly to herself or to Thomas or to nobody particular. "Okay." Jesse had stopped pulling dead growth and was watching Cole. "Is it over?" "The worst of it." "But not all of it. There'll be hearings, documents. Hale will need the families to testify formally, probably in a federal proceeding in Cheyenne. Cole looked at the boy. It's going to take time. These things always take time. But the shape of it is set now. It doesn't change. Jesse considered this. Drummond won't be able to undo it. No, he won't. Jesse nodded, satisfied in the way he was satisfied with things when they made sense and were properly set, like the porch board, like the corral latch. He went back to pulling dead growth. Cole watched him for a moment. This boy who had grabbed a stranger's boot in the street and refused to let go until the world rearranged itself into something survivable, and felt the scar on his palm press against the reins in his hand. The formal federal hearing took place in Cheyenne 6 weeks later. Cole rode with Maggie, Jesse, and Alderman in a hired wagon. Clara bundled between Maggie and a supply of everything an infant needed for a 2-day journey. Pete Garner and his wife followed in their own wagon. The Whitfields sent their eldest son with a written statement when the mother proved too ill to travel. Ruth Beckett drove herself alone, 70 years old, rod straight in the wagon seat, with the particular dignity of a woman who'd been waiting her whole life for exactly this kind of opportunity and was not going to miss it. The hearing lasted 2 days. Cole sat behind Maggie both days, not at the table, not as a party, just present the way he'd sat by the door that first night, watching over people who needed watching over. When Maggie spoke, she spoke for 90 minutes without notes. Everything she remembered in sequence. Every conversation with Thomas about the water. Every symptom she'd watched develop and tried to name every approach to Drummond, and every refusal, every document, and what it proved. She spoke the way Thomas had written, precisely, completely, without embellishment, trusting that the truth was sufficient. It was sufficient. When Pete Garner testified, he held his shaking hands flat on the table in front of him, and didn't apologize for the tremors, and didn't look away from the federal examiner, and said everything that needed saying in a voice that didn't break once. When it was over, he looked at Cole across the room and nodded once, the nod of a man who has done the thing that needed doing and can now live with himself again. Drummond's attorney presented for 3 hours on the second day, Cooperative Remediation Economic Contribution to the Community Precedent Technical Distinctions. The federal examiner listened, made notes, thanked the attorney for his thoroughness. The ruling came down 2 weeks later, delivered to Caldwell Creek by Federal Post. Cole read it at the kitchen table with Maggie across from him and Jesse at his shoulder, and Clara in her cradle on the other side of the room, taking in the Wyoming afternoon light, with the peaceful attention of a baby who had decided the world was a reasonably good place to be, which, given where she'd been 2 months ago, was a sound conclusion. Franklin Drummond was ordered to pay damages to affected families, the amounts calculated by the federal examiner based on medical costs, lost productivity, and property impact. The amount was significant. The mill was ordered to maintain proper environmental controls under federal oversight for a minimum of 5 years. The forged promissory note was officially entered into the federal record as fraudulent, and Drummond's 2 attorneys who had presented it in local court were referred to the Territorial Bar Association. Cole set the ruling down on the table. Jesse read it over, lips moving slightly, then looked up. "Is this?" He stopped. Recalculated. "They have to pay the families." "Yes." "For what happened? What the water did?" "Yes." Jesse looked at the ruling, at Thomas's name in the text, at the case being cited as the precipitating complaint. Thomas J. Calloway versus Drummond Mill Operations et al. His father's name on a federal document. His father's careful documentation referenced 3 times in the examiner's findings. "Papa's name is in there," Jesse said, very quietly. "It is," Cole said. "It'll be in the federal record permanently. Anyone who looks into this case from now on will know Thomas Calloway found it, documented it, and built the case." He looked at the boy. "His name is the reason any of this happened." Jesse pressed his mouth into a line. He was fighting something, the kind of fight that 9-year-old boys conducted privately and with great dignity. He won it mostly. His eyes were wet, but his voice was steady when he spoke. He didn't get to see it. "No," Cole said. "He didn't. But it happened." Jesse looked at the document again. He did everything right, and it happened even though he didn't get to see it. "Yes." Jesse picked up the ruling, handled it carefully, the way his mother had handled the deed. "Can I keep this, my copy?" "It's yours," Cole said. Jesse took it to his room. He was in there for a while. Nobody went to check on him. Some things needed their space. The damages paid to the Calloway family were enough to repair the barn properly, hire a hand for the spring planting, and set aside a sum that would see Jesse through schooling if he wanted it, and Clara through whatever she chose when the time came. Maggie sat with the bank draft for a long time, the evening it arrived, not looking at the amount, just holding it, the same way she'd held the tin box and the deed and Thomas's notebook, like it was a message from someone she missed. "He'd say to put most of it away," she said. "For the children." "Yes," Cole said. "He would. And he'd say to fix the north fence first, because it's been wrong for 2 years, and it's going to cost more the longer it waits." "Also correct. And he'd say—" She stopped, looked at the draft, set it down, looked at Cole across the table. "He'd say that a woman alone can run a ranch, and she's right to need help sometimes, and those two things aren't in conflict." She held Cole's eyes. Thomas believed that. He would have said it exactly that way. "Sounds like something worth believing," Cole said. Maggie looked at him steadily. "You fixed the porch board. You showed Jesse the carpentry. You rode to 4 families and collected statements. You met the federal marshal, and you sat behind me for 2 days in Cheyenne, and you didn't once try to run the thing when it was mine to run." She paused. "You know what Thomas would say about that? What? He'd say that's a man who understands the difference between helping and taking over." She looked at the fire. "He'd like you, I think. He'd probably be insufferably smug about it, actually. He was always right about people, and he always knew he was right, and it was extremely annoying." Something warm moved through her face, and it was grief, but it was also the particular intimacy of knowing someone so completely that you could be annoyed at them even in their absence. "He'd like you," she said again, "and he'd tell me not to waste the time I had being afraid of it." Cole looked at this woman across a kitchen table in a cabin on a Wyoming hill. A woman who had held her family together through 11 months of deliberate destruction and come out the other side with the deed in her hand, and her husband's name in the federal record, and both her children breathing clean water. Who had never broken, not once, not where anyone could see, and had quietly been breaking and rebuilding herself every single night in the dark. "Maggie," he said. "Don't be careful with it," she said. "Whatever you're about to say, just say it." "I'm not going anywhere," Cole said. "That's all. I know it's not a grand speech, but I've said it before and I meant it then and I mean it more now." He pressed the scar on his palm against the table's edge. "I stopped running when Jesse grabbed my boot. I'm still stopped." Maggie looked at him for a long moment. Whatever she'd been holding back, whatever last reserve of careful distance she'd been maintaining against the specific risk of trusting someone new with the things that mattered most, she let it go. She let it go the way she'd let out that breath in Alderman's office the morning after Clara's crisis, long and slow and complete. "Okay," she said. And she reached across the table and put her hand over his. They stayed like that for a while. Jesse appeared in this kitchen doorway. He looked at Cole's hand and his mother's hand. He looked at Cole. His face did a fast calculation that 9-year-olds weren't supposed to be capable of, and was entirely composed on the other side of it. "The north fence," Jesse said. "Can we start on it tomorrow? I looked at it this afternoon. It's worse than Mama said." "First light," Cole said. Jesse nodded. Then he looked at his mother, at the realness in her face, at the thing she was no longer working to conceal. "Papa would have liked him," Jesse said. "In case you were wondering, he would have thought it took long enough." Maggie laughed, a real one, sudden and bright, the laugh of a woman who had almost forgotten she still had it. "Go to bed, Jesse." Jesse went to bed. Clara from her cradle made the sound she made when she was absolutely content, a small settling sound like a period at the end of a sentence that had been a long time finishing. Outside, the Wyoming night was wide and cold and full of stars, the same stars that had burned over this land for 10,000 years and would burn for 10,000 more indifferent to the small human lives below them, except that they were there constant and bright present for all of it. Thomas Calloway had built this cabin with his hands, had dug this land with his hands, had written the truth in a notebook with shaking hands and left it under the floor for the people he loved. His name was in the federal record now. His careful, stubborn, meticulous work was the reason 4 families would receive justice, and a valley would drink clean water, and his daughter would grow up healthy, and his son would grow up knowing that doing the right thing, the hard, careful, documented right thing, mattered. Cole Hargrove had spent 6 years being a ghost, moving between places without settling, punishing himself for a farmhouse in Laramie, with an absence that had helped no one, least of all himself. He had stopped in Caldwell Creek because a boy with ancient eyes had grabbed his boot and refused to let go. He was home now. Not because the place was perfect or the road ahead was clear, or the grief of what they'd all lost had resolved itself into something comfortable, but because home was never those things. Home was a woman who said, "Just say it," and meant it. Home was a boy who asked to be taught things his father didn't get to teach him. Home was a baby in a cradle breathing clean air, getting stronger by the day. Home was the choice to stop, to stay, to be the 12th man and mean it and not ride away when the morning came. Cole Hargrove had made that choice in the mud in front of a mercantile, and every day since he had made it again, and he would keep making it, and that was not the end of the story. That was exactly where the real one began.